Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm Christian Allen with my co-host, Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So I have a couple of exciting pieces of news, Rod. And I have told you part of this, but our listeners don't know yet.
Okay.
So first thing, I had the electrician out to my house yesterday, and they got my new charger put in. So now my car isn't taking like 40, 50 hours to charge. It charges in like a couple hours.
Oh,
completely.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Okay, so I always say this, like I talk about my car. I'm not a car guy, but I like to have like a zippy car. I think it makes me feel like younger or something, if I'm being honest. I was like, I don't want like an old man luxury car because like I used to want that though. But then as I started to get older, I like suddenly like started to like be like, oh, maybe I want something with a little more possessive. Anyway, Rod, so I had my M340 that I just turned back into the BMW dealership. And I was super excited because I got this electric car. I had no intention of getting an electric car going into it. I just wanted a car that was faster than my M340, which was already pretty fast, right? And so I walk into the dealership, and this is great. The guy that has helped me, I know I lease my cars, and people are thinking, how can you that's the worst way? Well, I'm all about convenience. And so if you're about convenience, then leasing is really effective that way. But anyway, I go into the dealership, and I'm talking to the same person who has helped me for my last 3 cars. Right? Okay. That's pretty amazing. Like how many BMW sales reps like stay at a dealership for a decade? So anyway, my guy, Dustin, he's helping me out. And I'm like, okay, Dustin, I want something that's like faster than this one. I'm like, I've read it. Like I was thinking I wanted the M3 competition, which goes like 0 to 60. It's like 3.2, 3.1, 3.3, something like that. Right. And on their lot, they didn't have like a great selection, but they had an M8, but they also had this i4 M50. Right. And I had never heard of that one. Like, cause again, I wasn't into the electric car scene. But I see this car and I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like I'm kind of digging this thing. He tells me what it is. And then I'm like, okay, but I also want to look at and he's like, okay, Christian, so this is great. You can either get one of these or 2 of these. And that was it. Like he made my decision. So suddenly I became an electric car guy. But the problem was, Rod, I brought my super fast. Like that's the other thing. Electric cars are just so fast. Like it's kind of wild. Yeah. They just like it kind of feels like you're in like a roller coaster ride. You push on the gas and it's like zoo. Anyway, I was excited because I'm finally not having to wait for an eternity for the actual car to be ready to drive. Yeah. So I walk out this morning, 100% charge, and I was just like thrilled because the last few days I go out and drive it, and I'm like, I feel like I drive it for like 10 minutes and it goes down by 20, 30%, and I'm like, this is never going to work. Anyway, so
how much garage space
does the
charger take?
Very little. It's like it's like it's you know those little like hose mounts? Just put a little hose mount on the wall. Throw it on there and it's like out of the way. You go in and it's so great. Right? I don't have to go to the gas pump anymore. Holy Moses. I could not be happier about this. So anyway, I'm excited because I've got the electric car now. It's got the fast zippiness that I wanted. And I no longer have to go get gas. Not only do I have to not buy gas, Rod, I don't have to go and pump it.
Yeah.
Which can I just tell you, I know this is going to sound really pathetic, but I'm just like, oh, I hate pumping gas. So anyway, long story short, I'm pretty excited.
Happy guy. All right.
Yep. I got a lot of good things going my way.
I like it.
What about you? What's new?
We're just plugging along. We have a college graduate coming up. So Chase is just finishing up his degree. So end of this month, he'll walk.
All right.
and move on to
They
the
keep
next
coming.
stage of life.
One after another.
Yep.
You're going to be an empty nester before you know it, Rod.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a little while there.
Well, we have probably 7-8 years still. Our youngest is 11. So
my kids are the same. I mean, my youngest is the same age, and I'm not sure that I'm ever going to be an empty nester. So we'll just have to see how it goes. Anyway, okay, but this is not
potentially.
This is not the reason that people are tuning into the Money Insights podcast. But if you do want information on the BMW electric cars, I've done a little bit of due diligence and research lately that I'm your guy.
Christian at moneyinsightsgroup.com.
Christian at Money Insights Group. Yes, and I'm sure I'm going to get a barrage of emails for this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but today, Rod, we're talking about, I should just say the title of the episode is Unlocking Success, Lessons from Money Insights. So the last handful of episodes that we put out have been like really focused on like concepts and principles, which we always are focused on, like, but I wanted to kind of loosen the reins a little today. So instead of like meticulously talking through strategies like we oftentimes get into, today we're gonna just like chill a little bit, Rod, and we're gonna talk about some of the things that have led to our success that we hope can be useful for listeners. And my guess is that there's a lot of people who are, well, not my guess. I know there's a lot of business owners and there's a lot of high level professionals. And most of the stuff we're going to talk about, I think, applies across the board. So anyway, that's the plan for today. Do you have any objections to my plan,
No
Rod?
objections. Yeah, I'm ready.
You're okay with it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, with that being the case, let's jump into it, Rod. So I did some brainstorming and I came up with, I think, 6 or 7, like what I would call like key factors, things that really helped us differentiate and give us an edge in the competition. So the first thing that we did, and again, I just can't think of any reason why anyone should not be doing this. And number 1 is we were quick to embrace technology.
Yep.
Okay, talk about it, Rod. What do I mean when I say that? Because most people are like, well, of course, we try to. I email as well as the next guy. I text just like that. So what would you say was unique and different about where we were at, and like how does that apply to potentially listeners who are thinking, how do I invest better? How do I grow my business, etc.?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll give an example is we were working from home when that was weird. Like I almost had to hide it sometimes from people. And because back at the time, it's like, oh, so are you like working in your mom's basement? Or were you like,
it meant that you couldn't afford an office. Like, oh, you probably can't do that. So here, you're, and it's like, okay, they must not be very well established.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And you're right. But that was an advantage. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, well, because what happened was, so this was about 2015 or so, 14, 15, where we had an office. I was commuting into the office, and it wasn't a long commute, maybe 20, 25 minutes from home.
Man, Rod, every commute, that's a long commute.
It is now. Right. But if you're,
I guess if you live in Newark and you're like taking the train into New York, it's an hour, then you're right. Yeah. You're right. Okay.
So it wasn't a huge deal, but what happened is the more we started using technology, meaning I'm going to say Zoom meetings, even though we were on, I think it was WebEx or something at the time.
Oh my gosh. We were using WebEx originally.
Yeah. But what happened is,
it was GoToMeeting. We were using GoToMeeting.
Yeah, GoToMeeting. That's right.
That was our go-to.
So, but I would come in and I would get on internet calls and phone calls all day. And then I'd go home and pretty soon I'm like, man, I don't know that this makes any sense. I might as well stay home. I have the internet at home. I have my mobile phone anyway. And so it was something we did. So, but that's just an example, right? That's the transition happened for us earlier, I think, than most people, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, 2020 forced us to where we start working from home. I know that's kind of cool. I would love to do that. And so that epiphany happened for a lot of people. It was just a lot later. And we can say, well, 5 years, 6 years earlier, we were doing that.
Yeah. The other thing that made that unique was that the financial services business is just slow to adapt to changes.
Yeah.
So, and specifically the insurance industry, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got these old life insurance companies that like when they decide to pivot, it's not like, it's like turtle, like it's like just a little bit at a time, right? So Rod, there was a day where there were companies who were just like, not that long ago, who were just like, oh, you want to sell to somebody that you're not directly sitting in front of, seeing face to face, that's across state lines. They were like, sorry, we're just not going to have it. Nope, can't do it. Again, this is not that long ago, right? Now, today, that seems unfathomable, right?
Yeah.
But just a short time ago, we were doing that.
Yeah, we have examples where we couldn't get certain contracts with insurance companies when we told them how we were doing business. And we had one where I just was so far down the line that I just needed to complete the process with a client. Well, it turns out, so I live in Utah, she lives in Maine, and the insurance company says, we're not going to allow this unless you actually go and meet with her. So I literally flew across the country, spent a whole day to get there, met with her, signed, we had dinner together, and then I went to my hotel room so I could catch the like 3 a.m. flight the next day to fly back.
That's right. Man, Rod, you were a stallion on that one. Yeah. So, whew, props to you. But yes, the nice thing is most, or at least there were some companies, quality companies, that were, looking forward enough to see that was silly. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff there, but those are kind of the primary things. We were able to create a footprint that was across the country when all of our competition was like trying to meet with people in their backyard, right? Yep. Huge differentiator for us. Okay. The second one that I have here, Rod, is strategic partnerships. These have been a priority for me since day one, since I got in the industry. Can I just tell you, I got into the business, and I think this applies anywhere. And I thought to myself, I am not going to be in this business long if I have to scrap and claw to get one client at a time. Mm-hmm. Like I can't see a life where that's enjoyable. And I'm certainly not going to go and ask all of my clients, not going to pressure clients as I sit down with them to try and give me referrals for other people, because I've seen how painful that is, both, even like kind of being, I would say forced, but being strongly encouraged to do it.
Well, that was just
being on the other side of it. Yeah, well, that was the industry way. That's what you were taught. And if you go out there with your sales manager early on, that's what they're teaching you.
Yeah.
And man, Rod, it was so painful that it was like, it almost drove me out of the business entirely. Well, the good news is that we decided early on to focus on partnerships, relationships with people who had influence. Imagine that, right? Yeah. And it gave us a chance to create and develop influence for ourselves by working with other people who had that. Now, how does that work? Well, we basically had to go add value to the relationship, not by our following early on. We can do some of that now, but like early on, we had to do it by adding value in some other way. So we were creating a partnership that allowed someone who had influence to create a new revenue opportunity by providing a valuable service to their clients, right? And that's actually how I built my career from basically the first year that I was in the industry. I was doing it locally with CPA firms and found some success there, right? Like it kind of got me into that like noticeable level where it's like, okay, I had staying power, right? But I wasn't doing what I wanted to at that point. I was just better off. I was making $150,000 a year, but I, kind of still struggling. That sounds bad. I don't mean like struggling just like struggling to keep it up. Like it was a grind, Anyway, so strategic partnerships for me were clearly the way. And then for Money Insights as an organization, that's been a massive element to our success, right? We have key strategic relationships that continually flow business into it, where everybody wins from it because, again, we're providing a valuable service for investors, things that they need, that's, again, hugely valuable, while simultaneously the referrer who believes in the strategies, who believes in the concept, they can get compensated for being a referral source. And so for us, that was just massive. And again, a huge part of our ability to grow and create more revenue.
And consistency, right?
And consistency. Yeah. So like, again, the reason that people fall out of our business is because they can't get enough people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing could have happened to us if we went about it the exact same way that 99% of people are going about it. Luckily, we had the foresight to say, all right, how can we find something that's going to be more successful long term? And that's what's kind of allowed us to like grow and be, especially with like, we try to keep a high efficiency. Like, here's what we're not one of those typical agencies that tries to hire 50 people and just say, hey guys, go out and try to figure it out, go out and try to get business. We're an organization that brings the business to us. People ask us to meet with them. We don't meet with anybody that doesn't ask us for a meeting.
Right.
And so the model had to be different. It had to be focused on really relationships and partnerships. So one element is the strategic partnership, and then the other element is just relationships in general. That element to building a business or becoming more successful, I think is hugely valuable and important. Whew, I've been on a tangent, Rod. Sorry.
Well, this, as much as anything else we're going to talk about, is just requires consistency, because conceptually it all makes sense, right? Especially looking back and we see how we were able to kind of put the pieces together. But man, how many attempts did we have to forge those relationships to actually have some that became successful? And we had a bunch that were willing, right? Yeah, let's do this. And we put all the work in and got the relationship set up, and there was some business done. So it's not like there was nothing, but just didn't really get off the ground like some of our other relationships have. And so for every let's call it successful, consistent relationship that we have, there must be 5 or 6 or more that
I'm sure
that
just weren't really that. And so we did learn the hard way, spending and I think this is an important lesson. It's not about any relationship. It's about the right relationships, right? So if you're listening to this and you're like early on and thinking like anybody that will grab hold on of like an opportunity to work together, my experience is that that's fool's gold oftentimes, and it really does have to be a match. So looking for the right relationships that can really be mutually beneficial is far more valuable than just trying to bring anybody to you that will, potentially, send you a referral. That doesn't work. Okay, Rod, number 3 on our key factors to success: finding and focusing on a niche. Talk about why it's important and maybe kind of how we did it.
Yeah, well, I think for the starting point for us was in our education, in our learning, and really kind of in our approach is being more broad-based. And then basically narrowing in, being opportunistic, right? Having seeing the opportunities that were there, trying a lot of different approaches, and really it just kind of narrowed from there to the point where today we are very narrowly focused. It's not that because we do still do some business in disability life insurance or disability insurance, or in more term insurance or some of these other things that aren't as much of our core message, but it still fits within our core competency. And so we do it. But the messaging, the approach, when we're educating, we're putting our message out there, it's a lot more focused and narrow. And I think the combination of the education that we've been able to get, the things that you've talked about in terms of technology and whatnot, have really helped us to do that. Because if we were trying to be as narrow as we are now, but only willing to meet face to face with local people, probably wouldn't work out the same way as it has, while we're much more broad-based. And so that message hits someone, they pick up on it, they ask for that meeting, and then we can move on from there. But it's across the country instead of just, especially for us in Utah, in a relatively small populated area, to do what we've done, really the pieces coming together made it all happen.
Yeah, well, we obviously our niche, our focus is on high income earners and helping them be more effective in their investing. Well, as at least our kind of our core messaging, right? One of the things that's kind of we had to learn, to your point, is that we can't be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And so from a messaging standpoint, we really focus in on two primary kind of strategic messages. One of them is our capital avalanche to help create income, and the other one is like all inclusive because it's focused on helping people produce better returns in their investing regardless of what it is, right?
Yep.
So but while those are like to your point, while those are the core things that we do, we're oftentimes doing things that are in other areas of retirement income planning or investment planning or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one of those things where we had to learn, though, that telling people, everybody that we see, hey, we do all of these multitude of things, like, if you're good at everything, you're usually good at nothing. And that's the way that people generally see it, right? It's just like a physician that's a specialist oftentimes can just be, flowing with people to see and take 3 months or 6 months to get in because of they've built up a demand, right?
Yep.
For their services. And similarly, that's what we've tried to focus on, is building up a demand so that people are coming to us because they know that we'll be able to deliver and help them with their specific issues.
Yeah. Well, and if you're trying to be everything to everyone, it's really hard for them to grab hold of, okay, really, where can you provide value to me? Right.
Yeah.
If you're saying, hey, whatever your need is, I'll help fulfill it. And they're like, well, I have a lot of needs. How are we going to get to a place where we can come together on this? And so kind of an interesting.
Yeah. So if you're out there and kind of trying to decide, this was hard, by the way. I want to talk about some of the psychology of this, because locking in on a niche is not as easy as it sounds. It sounds really great until you have to do things that naturally, I don't want to come up with the right word, but ostracize, I think that's not the right word, but naturally are like not speaking to people who you might have otherwise spoken to, or you might be able to get a piece of business done with in the moment. Like, but now you're suddenly talking to a very specific niche group of people. And the concern is, well, what about all these other people I could be helping?
Yeah.
Right. And that is a difficult thing. And so it's one of those things where you just have to fight against human nature and realize that it actually works the opposite way. While that's hard for us to comprehend, it just is. And I've had a difficult time with that. There's been a lot of, even with our messaging in general, there's times where I'm like, is it, do we need to make sure that we're emphasizing this area or this area? And oftentimes I have to leave those elements out, realizing that this is what's speaking to people. And once we have the conversations, we could potentially get into other things. But the key element, especially to growing a business or growing our career, is to be attractive, right? To be able to attract people and opportunities. And I think that's really the focal point.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's important to find a niche, whether we're in, the same thing applies like from a career perspective, right? Like usually specialists tend to make more money than generalists. And when you're talking about a business, that's 100% been my experience, both in our business and as we've talked to obviously thousands of other businesses.
Yeah, I would say opportunity to make more, and often more in demand. So how often is it that you're looking for that specialist and you have to be scheduled 2, 3, 4 months out because
it's frequent,
right?
Absolutely. Yep. So staying in demand is a really important element. Okay, Rod, number 4, and this kind of goes in line with I'm going to add another piece to this, but I put it here as crafting a compelling message. So I do think that this was one of those things that was a work in progress for us. Mm-hmm. We've had to maneuver it over time and make sure that we're hitting the right points at the right time with the right people, right? Yeah. And that does take a little bit of trial and error. But one thing that was very consistent for us is that we were always education focused first.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to be the pushy salespeople that was like important at our core. We never wanted to apply pressure to people. Like our goal is to try to avoid doing that. I genuinely believe that people do business with people that they feel comfortable with, right? Like know, like, and trust is an element that's absolutely true, but feeling comfortable with is every bit as important, because the second you're getting off a call or you're getting out of an appointment with someone and you just don't feel that great about it, like that's when things have a real opportunity to go sour. And even if you get the deal done, it still puts a strain on the ongoing relationship. So our focus has always been education first. So while it took some time to create the compelling message that drew people in as well as it does today, and it still evolves, right? We're still evolving. As well as that, we've done that. Like it really did take time, effort, energy, and then it came together, or at least it's coming together.
Yeah. And gratefully, we've been able to hone that by having a lot of conversations with a lot of people and seeing what resonates. Basically saying, okay, we recognize where you are today and how can we get you to a place where you understand what we're describing enough so that you can see if it has value in your life and then take steps to get there. And it's been a process for sure.
Okay, Rod, we are at number 5. I just put another one in there, crafting a compelling message. I was going to add it. I was going to add education as an additional one, and then I decided to put it into segment 4. So
got it. Okay.
Now we are on number 5, Rod, which is integrity and transparency. This is one of those things that most people say and some people do, right? But I think over time, it always shows itself. So like for us, well, one, I think just personal core values, like at our core, it was important to just live this way. Well, a couple things. Okay, so here's the other thing. We talk about and teach what can sometimes feel and be complex principles, complex ideas and strategies, right? So what oftentimes happens out in the world and in the investment world, in the insurance world, is it's like people get bogged down and confused. And sometimes the people teaching the information are happy that it's happening that way, right? They're totally comfortable with the idea that it's probably all the pieces aren't really going to necessarily make sense, but basically trust us.
Yeah.
Well, we wanted to take the opposite approach where it was like, let's make this make sense so you're not having to just trust us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So anyway, I think when I say transparency, for us, it's transparency in the way that we do business with like our partners and that kind of thing, but it's also transparency in the way that we do business with our clients, and specifically the way we teach them about the strategies so that they actually know it well enough to feel comfortable and confident on their own, standing, they've got a foundation that says like, hey, I know why I'm doing this. I don't have to go, necessarily back to Rod every time in order to relearn it. Although we understand that there's some elements that are going to be like, that can be fuzzy. Like I get that. But for the most part, people are foundationally strong. And that gives and again, because our focus is on making sure we're teaching the information in as transparent a way as possible.
And I think that's a really good point too, is by having ongoing conversations with people, we are allowing for that. Because how many times do you like take your recent example with buying the car, and at that moment you knew a bunch, right? Well, a year from now, if I ask you the same questions, some of it might be more fuzzy, right? And one of the embarrassing things to say in our industry is that agents aren't always great at keeping up with their clients or being accessible or reaching out or whatever. And that we're going to get into that a little more here in a minute, but that is a really important thing for this point, because people do dive in, they do learn it, they understand it, but then a year later, they are going to come back and say, okay, can we talk through this again? Right. And I often get that, right. Hey, they'll even be apologetic. Hey, sorry, I'm asking the same questions. And I'm like, hey, I totally get it. Right. We're just number one, we're clarifying what ground we already covered, but it always grows into more. They're getting a deeper understanding. They're in it now. They're living it. They're using it. And they have different questions that come up or different angles of maybe some of the same questions. And so having those ongoing conversations are huge as well.
Well said, Rodney. Okay, so we have been through 5. We have technology, strategic partnerships, focusing on a niche, crafting a compelling message, and focusing on education. Upholding integrity, Rod, and transparency. Number 6, delivering an exceptional client service. Okay, so this, to your point, this just feeds. We'll just talk about this briefly. To your point, this is a massive problem in the industry. Like you said, it's all too common for people, even people who are putting a lot of money into these investments or into these insurance policies. In some cases, like even if that's the case, there is a dearth of agents who have what's the right word? A lot of them want to execute on it, but it's really difficult to, especially if you're like a one-man show, right? So if you're a one-man show, you're trying to create new business. And so then it becomes really difficult to deliver on the promise. Well, one of the things that was super important to us was that we were able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so what that meant is that, taking leaps of faith at times when, even if it was uncomfortable, making sure we were having an assistant or having more than one person work on a single client, as an example of something we've done for years and years, right? Mm-hmm. Like a way that we could make sure that we understood what was happening, and then being able to consistently deliver on it. And of course, with some of the strategies that we use now, like the capital avalanche, that becomes even more critical. While the investment optimizer strategy is like, once you kind of get it going, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like we're usually helpful in the sense that we're helping people flow the loans and stuff like that, so they don't have to deal with that. Which, by the way, is another thing that most people don't do. But again, something that was hugely important to us. On the capital avalanche side, it's a little bit more complex and it requires more ongoing. What's the right word that I'm looking for? Ongoing service, maintenance, support, maintenance. Yeah, any of those words, right? We have to make sure that each year we're doing the right things to make sure the plan goes the way that we want it to. Yep. So it becomes even more critical. Well, the point is just to say, because of that focus on client service, I think that even allowed us to add strategies that could be interesting and compelling, knowing that we have a client service focus and pathway to be able to actually deliver it on it to people. And again, I think that's a big part of like why we have a ton of good 5-star reviews, because it's one thing to sell someone on a concept. It's another thing to have someone feel really good about it a year later, 2 years, 5 years, a decade. And that was really what our goal was. And I think for the most part, we've accomplished that.
And what's cool about that is when they're expressing their own thoughts, but it comes back to you in really expressing a lot of the things we've talked about here today, right? Like the education part of it or the service part of it, and these are things that we knew we wanted to do, or even you talked about making people comfortable, right? Those are words that come back to us in those reviews, because we've just built a system, a process, a culture around those things. And so as people are experiencing that, it's just gratifying. Again, we're not just here to pat ourselves on the back and everything.
It's heartwarming though.
It feels, just really, I can't get with the word.
It feels good, man. I'm telling you, it's like heartwarming. Sometimes I read them and I'm like, oh, I'm going to tear up. It feels so good. But our point in saying it isn't like, while we are kind of patting ourselves on the back at this moment, I think the broader point here is, if you do these things, like if these are principles that anybody can follow and do, and if they do them, they'll get the same results. And then it's really nice when you start to feel the reward, because then it like propels you to continue that and want to do more and better. And then you kind of get the thing rolling, because one of the most difficult parts about creating a business and building a business or building a career is getting the thing going, right? Like It's like you just like, you scratch and claw to get it moving. But man, if you can get that thing rolling, you build a little momentum, and suddenly things start to really take off. And I feel like that was primarily because of many of these kind of principles that we started with from day one. And if we wouldn't have had any of these, Rod, I can without question say that we would be far further behind than we are today with that if we took out any one of those. Okay. That was number 6. Rod, talk about number 7, because this is as important as any of them. Attitude and approach have been really a huge focus for us from day one.
Yeah, so I have 3 points on this one, and I didn't tell Christian what they are, so he's as interested.
I'm excited. Here we go.
Okay, so the first one, I was trying to come up with a good name for it. I don't know if this is a good name for it, but I call it the get her done attitude. So, and what
get her done? Can you spell that for us, Rod? Is that with an ER?
Yeah, there's ER apostrophe ER for
get her done. Okay,
yeah.
Or is it just an R? Get
it could be. Okay, I spelled it out that way, but
either way.
Yeah.
Okay,
and then here's what I mean by this. And what's funny is every time I describe this to you, you don't get it because you just live it. But these are one of the things that I learned from you and others is just this idea that if there's something that we want to get done, then we're just going to go and find a way to get it done. And here was an example of where I started to learn this. Again, this was early on. This was 12 years ago or something.
Oh boy,
I'm nervous. We had put in an application to an insurance company, and they wanted to see some medical records before they could make their decision, right? So we reached out, or they were reaching out to the doctor's office to gather those records, and the doctor's office just wasn't being responsive. And weeks went by, and we're just like, as we're reviewing things, and I'm just like, well, the doctor's not getting the stuff back. And you're like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Like, what can we do? There's like nothing we can do.
We're just stuck, right? It feels that way.
But you forced the point, and you said basically, well, no, let's not let the thought go at, well, gee, what can we do? But let's actually turn that into a real question and think about what can we do. And as we did that, within a couple of hours, we had the medical records and sent them to the insurance company, and so we could move forward. So again, that was kind of a simple example, but nonetheless, one where I felt like we're stuck. There's nothing we can do. And yet by pushing past that and saying, okay, no, but really. And so really it was just a matter of us calling the doctor's office and just saying, hey, what can be done to make this happen? They were gratefully able to jump on it right there. They faxed them to us, and yes, they faxed them.
Yeah, they faxed them.
But anyway, but that so
it is a good example. Can I just tell you that I'm not sure if that's like a compliment or not, because it's like also just emphasizing that I'm extremely hard-headed, and I think that's true. Now, I'll just say this. I totally agree with what you said, because there is an element to just having to figure it out, like just saying like, I don't know how I'm going to figure it out, but I'm going to figure it. You got to get her done, Rod, like you said.
Yep.
But it doesn't always work either.
No,
right?
But yeah.
But the attitude is the key.
Yes. And so as I've learned from entrepreneurs, whether it be through books or podcasts or even, Ayn Rand and describing, in Atlas Shrugged, the successful, that was the way they approached things, where other people were just willing to sit by and see what happened. They were out there making it happen. And those are the words that I often say to myself. Well, how can I make this happen? And like you said, it doesn't always work, but it's an attitude. It's something. Okay. So that was one of them.
It's an attitude that creates innovation, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, oh, hey, this is a good way that money, like these are the thing that we know about these, to be really clear, is that they're just great principles that, and if and when done, and have been done by many, many successful people for a long, long time, they create really great outcomes, right? Yep. And so that I just think is a really good example of it.
Yeah. And then the second one is actually going to be a little more embarrassing for you, because it is focused on you, but it's just the visionary approach of looking 2-3 steps ahead. I often get just in the moment, hey, I got to get this stuff done. I'm working hard. I'm doing these things. But I'm only thinking about where I am and maybe the next step. and then you'll be thinking, oh, but what about this down the road, or what's the impact of these things as it relates to where we want to go, and so it's and sometimes it's more personality. In our case, it's worked out really well to have two partners where we are very different, and our sometimes that doesn't work for us, but in a lot of ways it has worked for us because the strengths that we bring are very different.
Do you know what that's called, Rod?
I know there's a name for it. I don't know what it's called.
Anxiety.
Oh, okay.
That's what you just described. You just described me, Rod, because yes, I am anxious and therefore always looking as many steps down the line as I can, both for the opportunities and unfortunately I'm thinking about the pitfalls too, right?
Yeah.
But I do think like this isn't like a me thing. It goes back to and it's certainly not Stephen R. Covey thing either, but it is important to try to start with what you're wanting at the end in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start with the end in mind. And my experience has been like, that's a big part of what drives me. Those mundane steps in between. So here's the difference, Rod. You get stuck on the step of not thinking far enough out. I get stuck in the stuff. I can't get through the weeds.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like both of those elements end up being really important. To your point, your focus on helping us execute my ideas and, is every bit as important and valuable as actually coming up with them. So anyway, I appreciate the props, Rod, but I really genuinely think like you have to have both in order to get there. So thinking ahead is super important, and having the ability to execute it is equally as important.
Get her done.
Get her done, man. I like it. I like it. Hey, do you have another one, or is that all?
I had a third one, but it's basically the same because my third one was just try everything / anything, and just this idea to be open-minded and not. I mean, and you can't try everything, and you shouldn't try to be just out there doing everything. We already kind of hit that point, but being willing to try.
You've got to be open, right? You've got to be open-minded because opportunities could come. And if you're just like shutting everything out and saying like, hey, I have all of you have to realize that you don't have all of the answers. Like be smart enough to realize that even if you're killing it, there's probably somebody else that has at least an element of success that you're not implement or that you have yet to implement in your world and that would suddenly make have an impact. And I think about that constantly. Frustrates the heck out of me. Again, Rod, it's my anxiety speaking. But at some level, like that has helped us just kind of piece things together and, get where. Okay, Rod, this has been fun. I've really enjoyed talking about our successes. So thanks everybody for allowing us to do that for a few minutes. But I also want to hit on at least a couple of lessons learned along the way, because while we have built a relatively successful business and want to continue to do that, it hasn't been all roses, right? Like we've had some rocky times along the way, and so let's just throw out a few of the things that we've struggled with, or a few of the lessons learned. Maybe that's the better way to say it. Okay, Rod, do you want to go first, or you want me to?
Yeah,
you go first.
This is one that we've talked about and actually did an episode on this one, but getting distracted from our core. And we wanted to grow in, be diversified, have revenue coming in from different directions. But I think we got a little too far from what we know and whatever. So we went out and bought a spa and thought we were being smart because we bought a franchise that already had systems, and we would be able to have a manager there that would just run the day-to-day, and we would just have to check in from once in a while and cash the checks, right? And that didn't.
And that's how it worked, right?
Not quite.
Oh, okay. Shoot.
Yeah. So
well, the spa was a learning experience and not one that I would do again. So people are like, oh, I wouldn't change it. I would absolutely change it. I would not buy that spa, and I would have stayed focused on. Okay, what's funny though, Rod, as you were talking about that, I was thinking to myself, oh, he's going to say we got overly focused on digital marketing strategies.
Okay.
And that's what was going through my head. And I'm like, oh, he's right. We've really we built our business on partnerships and relationships. And I got a little too focused on trying to make it all come through a virtual flow.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit painful. I think that got a little outside of our core as well. But on the other hand, we were still focused on the other thing. We just, anyway, that one was even further off that was way off the reservation, Rod. And one of them that was just kind of a bad idea, but we did have some good learning experiences along the way.
Yeah, we've learned a lot. And so that's the two sides of the coin, right? The one side we talked about is try anything and be willing to try whatever. And then it turns out you try some things and you're like, okay, that just wasn't ever even really.
Don't try that though. So yeah, okay, be thoughtful in what you're trying, and maybe learn from our experience, right? If it's totally outside your wheelhouse, maybe that's not the place to go. What would have been more well, there's a lot of moves that could have been more logical, and we've since kind of started to focus on this. Okay.
Yep.
I like that one, Rod. So I'll go next. Okay, Rod. There were at least a couple of years there where we had the desire, the want to start the podcast, but didn't. So one of my regrets is that we did not start the podcast sooner. And looking back, it would have been, again, much more of an advantage had we started it 2 years earlier when we kind of originally started, thinking through it. And, so anyway, obviously it's become incredibly popular. I think about some of the people who got in there early, and that just is a huge advantage.
Would have been a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And for some of those people, you look at some of those people who got in there early, sometimes I don't know how else to say this, but sometimes not even great podcasts, right? But because of the timing of it, they were able to develop a big audience and kind of build and grow from it, regardless of, necessarily the quality of it. So anyway, timing I think was important. I wish we could go back and do it again. And yet, super excited about the podcast so far and have no intentions of stopping anytime soon.
What people may not know is we actually recorded probably 20-25 podcasts that just never got aired and will never get aired.
No, they will never air. They will definitely not air, Rod, because those are probably really bad. But anyway, thanks everybody for the support on the podcast. Okay, Rod, what's your next one?
Yeah, my next one is reporting and tracking, and this one's got to be even more painful to you to hear than the one I mentioned.
Hey, Rod. Well, newsflash, it was actually my number one on my list. I chose to go to my second one. I started on the bottom, but my number one is tracking and metrics. Yeah. So that has been much more difficult than I anticipated, right? It's just not as easy. And for our world, we have kind of a unique sales flow, right? The process goes through underwriting. And so it's a long process. We're not selling a widget, a vacuum, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so that looks like it's just a much longer sales process, and therefore the reporting and tracking becomes a lot more complex. And yet, I wish we could have gotten better at it sooner. And I still hope that we can get better at it.
Absolutely. Yeah. That will be another one of those things that will be ongoing. We'll hone it. We'll get there. Well, maybe we won't get there. I shouldn't say that. We will continue down that path, continually improving.
Okay, I only have one other one, Rod. I probably could. I'm sure there's others that I could throw. I'm certain there are others that I could throw out there. I mean, I'm thinking about mistakes I made and spending too much money on marketing and things that I got excited about and maybe didn't do enough due diligence to see how well they would fit or whatever, right? So there's other kind of little things along the way. But the other one that I have is just trying to, at a holistic overall level, be more organized from day one. I think we're pretty organized, and yet I would have liked to be more organized.
Yeah.
That kind of fits in with the tracking and metric stuff, but Those were like the biggest thing.
And it comes with growth, because there was a time when it was just you and me that like we were doing everything, and that it wasn't useful as it relates to just this level of being organized and whatnot. But then we've been able to add some pieces that have made a huge difference in that, for sure.
Yeah, good lessons learned. Okay, do you have any other lessons learned you want to throw out?
That was it. I covered mine.
Okay, so this has been fun, Rod. I hope this has been like a little bit different listening to it, not as like intensive into principles and just kind of focused on our journey. But I also hope that it's like that it's useful, right? I know that I learn from people's experiences, and so again, the focus, the goal here wasn't to say, "Hey, Rod and Christian are super awesome." It was really to say, "Hey, here's some things that have really worked well." And we hope these things can work well for those of you who are trying to kind of continue, or really, it doesn't matter where you're at. The path is built on most of these foundational principles, and there's probably a few others. But anyway, that was really the focus. And then finally, learn some of the lessons from our painful mistakes. And if you want to talk more about it, call Rod. He's your guy. Call Rod.
Unless it's the car.
Unless it's the car. If you want to talk about the car. Okay, this has been fun. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.